Welcome to JCTV Mid-Missouri Art News special today here at Jefferson City, Missouri, the capital of the state of Missouri. I'm your host, Rick Jey, and honored to again chat with our guest, returning to the round table, Dr. Joan Stack, who will be bringing us a close look at the lives of two famous artists in Missouri, George Caleb Bingham and Thomas Hart Benton. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joan Stack back with us here at JCTV Mid-Missouri Art News.
Hello.
Great to have you again with us.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Great. Well, Dr. Stack, it is such a great feeling to have you back at the round table again. Dr. Stack is here again to educate us and share the high and low points of two incredible Missouri artists, George Caleb Bingham and Thomas Hart Benton. Dr. Stack, I guess I will turn it over to you. I know you have a lot to share about these two magnificent artists and how they actually tie into your efforts on a daily basis. So please share with us the life and bring us close to Thomas Hart Benton.
Well, of course, Thomas Hart Benton is familiar to everyone in Jefferson City because his murals grace the state capitol. There's the wonderful Social History of Missouri, which he did in 1936, one of his masterpieces. I think he considered it his greatest mural achievement. So we are very lucky to have his work here in Mid-Missouri and at the State Historical Society as well. We have over 300 works, most of them on paper, but we do have 10 large paintings by Thomas Hart Benton. And I know when we talked earlier, you talked about wanting to know who Thomas Hart Benton was. Why did he become this person who had such an intense interest in Missouri? We know he was born in Missouri. He was born in Neosho, Missouri. His father was a U.S. congressman from Missouri, so he had politics in his blood. Even more than just his father, his great-great-uncle was one of the first two senators from Missouri, and his name was Thomas Hart Benton. So if you are the young boy, Thomas Hart Benton, it's going to be a little bit of something to live up to that you're named after this very famous Missourian at the time. So he grows up in politics. He grows up living half of his time in Washington, D.C., and half of his time in Neosho, Missouri. And one of the things that I think is important to remember about Thomas Hart Benton is he's very well educated. He is learning all kinds of things. He's very well read in Washington, D.C., and of course his family is pretty well off. They have a wonderful library. So he is a pretty sophisticated guy, but he's also very attached to the Ozarks and life in the Ozarks. And not all of his friends are the sons of congressmen. So he gets to know the people of that region and the landscape of that region as a child. So that, I think, will inform his work later on.
Excellent, excellent.
Now, of course, later, Benton decides to go to art school. His father wants him to be a lawyer, because that's what you are in the Benton family, but he convinces his family to let him go to art school. He starts out in Chicago, but then he thinks, I've got to get to Paris. That's where you study art. So he went and spent about 2 years in Paris and learned French, spoke French fluently. Years later, we have an interview with him on tape in which he talks about what he's reading. And he says, I'm reading Baudelaire in the original French, and I'm reading Thomas Aquinas. So that gives you some idea of how knowledgeable he was and the great depth of understanding that he had of history, of art history, of politics, of American history. He studied all those things. I bet if you ever get a chance to go to his house in Kansas City, you can see his library, and you can see his extensive interest. You can look at his record collection. Most of the music, he was interested in folk music. He was especially interested in how that tied into Missouri traditions, but he also had a great interest in classical music. His wife was Italian, so he had that influence in his life.
Oh my.
So he was a complex character, and I think that's to our benefit as we get to experience his artwork, because we see he puts a lot of stuff. His pictures are very loaded with layers of meaning, but he often makes Missouri his subject matter. And I think that love affair with Missouri that dates back from his days in the Osho really shows in his artwork. Missouri is frequently the subject matter, the Missouri landscape, Missouri people, Missouri places, Missouri history, especially in the Capitol murals, are a big part of his life and a big part of what he does.
Right. Now, I think he was somewhat witty too, you might say. So that's part of his personality, not only in his construction of his works, but I think just a great personality that we're learning about. Well, now, he is known as naturally the illustrator for the Mark Twain's Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which most of us have read as a young man, what have you. And so that's my first introduction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I brought you a photograph of one of the original illustrations that is now on display in our gallery. It is the famous scene from Tom Sawyer where he paints the fence, or he gets others to paint the fence for him. And yeah, it's interesting. The illustrations from Tom Sawyer are wonderful. We actually have on display illustrations for Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and Life on the Mississippi. So I encourage your viewers to come and see the exhibition. We're calling it On the Big River at the Society. But in connection with Thomas Hart Benton's life, he says that he read Huckleberry Finn at least once a year because it got him in touch with Missouri and its landscape and the rivers, which were so important to his understanding of the state. And also the Tom Sawyer illustrations are very interesting because I've read that Rita, he got very obsessed with Tom Sawyer when he was doing these illustrations, and she said, Tom, you are not Tom Sawyer. But he felt that it linked up with his own experiences as a child in the Osho, though that's not quite Hannibal, but there are a lot of similarities with different areas of rural Missouri. So we're very proud to have that exhibition on display.
Yes. Now things got a little bit more serious as the Depression of the 30s and what have you, which he would have witnessed, and the wars. Yeah. So I guess a painting that really brings my attention is the Embarkation.
That's right. Yeah, the Embarkation is one of our monumental paintings in the new Center for Missouri Studies that you can really get a good look at. It is a huge painting. It's the size of a wall. It takes up a wall. Yes. In our old building, it was sort of made, it looked very claustrophobic with our low ceilings, and it didn't do it justice. But now we can really show off this painting. And what it shows is soldiers getting ready in the middle of the night to get on a boat to go overseas at the beginning of World War II, American soldiers. And you see the kind of hustle and bustle of what they're doing. But one soldier turns around and looks back. And he looks back at us. So we actually participate in the painting. We feel as though he's looking back at us.
He draws you in.
And it's that feeling that's communicated is, how do you feel as you leave your homeland and go off to fight abroad or overseas? You are looking back at home and thinking, this may be the last time I see my home. I may not be coming back. Being
drafted in 1965 and part of the Vietnam, shall we say, action, I can identify with that. You tell your parents, they said goodbye. I said, no, I'll see you again.
Yeah.
And that's the way I left it. And unfortunately, I survived and and here today.
But that's the universal aspect of this picture.
Yes.
We found veterans from all wars,
All
even
wars.
today, are really moved by this picture. So again, I encourage you to come and see it in person, because it's monumental. The figures are almost life-size, and it's a really powerful experience.
It's definitely a powerful experience. Like I say, it draws you in.
Yeah.
I think just leaving home to a foreign country, what have you, for a job, what have you, still you have to say goodbye and hope you return. Well, now, things got a little bit involved in the 30s. As going west, his painting.
Yeah.
I can identify, even as a young man, how many was in the post-war, 44, when I was born. We saw many people loading up on the highways with their goods in a trailer and what have you, and they would be going west. So, but I can only imagine, I can identify with the going west painting also.
Well, in a way, we've got two artworks that have that topic. One is actually called Going West, and it is a steam train. And so it really gives you the power of the steam age, the excitement of those old trains, and it's surging forward. So he manipulates it somewhat to get that feel of movement. And that's, Benton is famous for his movement. Everything seems to be in motion. And then the other work, The Departure of the Jones, they too are going west.
Right.
This is a illustration from the famous Steinbeck novel, The Grapes of Wrath. And Benton was actually hired by the movie company that was working on the film version, directed by John Ford, starring Henry Fonda, to do some illustrations. And so The Departure of the Jones is part of that. And the image was enlarged many times and used on some giant movie posters way back then in 1939. So it's kind of exciting to have that on display in our exhibition, the complete edition lithographs of Thomas Hart Benton. We are one of the few, if not the only public institution, the State Historical Society of Missouri is one of the very few institutions that has a complete set of every lithograph that Thomas Hart Benton produced in an edition. So all of the lithographs are drawn on a stone and then printed by a master printer. It's not the same as a photographic print. And so these were produced in limited editions from our lowest numbered edition is 10, our highest is 250. So they're pretty spectacular to see, and we're real excited to have those on display. Both Going West and The Departure of the Jones are part of that exhibition.
Right. And I want to invite everyone once again to take in the Historical Society of Missouri, the Study Center there on Elm Street in Columbia, Missouri. Talking about going west once again, Grapes of Wrath is one of the one that I really identify with.
Yeah, and not only do we have the Departure of the Jones, we also have, he did portraits, imaginary portraits of each of the Jones, and we have those on display as well.
Oh, excellent. It's really fantastic, awesome to go take it in. I felt honored just to attend the opening, and it was nothing that it was not a letdown, believe me. Well, Dr. Stack, we must take time out for a special message. Please stay with me.
Okay.
After the break, Dr. Stack shares the high and low points of artist George Caleb Bingham. We'll be right back.
I wasn't always this good. I had a lot to learn. I had to practice. And practice. And practice. Until one day, my dream came true. Sure, it wasn't easy, but it was worth it.
Welcome back to JCTV Mid-Missouri Art News, a special today, as we have reviewed last segment, the artist Thomas Hart Benton, and now I'd like to ask Dr. Joan Stack to share with us a little bit about the life and times of artist George Caleb Bingham, and any relation maybe between the two, what inspired Mr. Bingham along the way. So I welcome again.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, Bingham, of course, is also somebody that most Missourians may have heard of. He made Missouri the subject matter of most of his art. And he is somebody who grew up with Missouri. He was originally born in Virginia, but at the age of 8, he immigrates to Missouri with his family and settles in Franklin, Missouri, which is right in the center of the state. It was a river town. It was an important river town, but it later flooded. So now New Franklin still exists.
Franklin, yes.
Old Franklin was quite near to there. So that's where he begins his Missouri life as a kid. And so he too had all these probably very exciting experiences in this frontier river town with the Missouri landscape, with the people who had immigrated to Missouri in the period when it was a territory. Now, Missouri becomes a state in 1821. His father is a justice of the peace. So he gets involved in political issues fairly early on. And by the 1830s, he has decided he does not like Andrew Jackson and becomes a Whig. And that will be very important in his life. He is a rabid Whig, and he decides to begin working as a painter. He starts out with portraits. His family ends up moving to Arrow Rock after the death of his father, and there is still the George Caleb Bingham home in Arrow Rock, which was where he lived in the 1830s. But George Caleb Bingham, there's not a lot of money to be made in Arrow Rock. It's still a fairly small town. So he goes to Columbia, Missouri, and there he meets James Rollins, who famous as one of the founders of the University of Missouri.
Yes.
They become good friends, and he paints portraits of local Columbians. That's still not good enough. He needs to get some more experience, so he ends up going to St. Louis, gets a little bit more sophisticated in his painting style, and eventually goes to Philadelphia to try to learn some of the lessons of the great artists like Thomas Sully or Gilbert Stuart, who were painting portraits in the manner of the Europeans. So he gradually sort of teaches himself. He goes to the Philadelphia Academy, sits in on some classes, gets some books, but he doesn't take formal classes. He's pretty much self-taught. But he's an amazing self-taught artist. But by the 1840s, he becomes interested in going beyond just the portraits and painting life as he knows it in Missouri, in this frontier world, and finds that the people on the East Coast are very interested in what life on the frontier is like. He starts submitting paintings to the new Academy, the new American Artists Union in New York, and they are very attracted to his pictures of the people who are working on the Missouri River. And so perhaps his most famous painting, which we don't have at the State Historical Society, but his most famous painting is probably the one in the Metropolitan Museum of Art called Fur Traders Descending the Missouri.
Yes.
And it shows a French fur trader and his half-Indian son in a canoe, and there's a strange creature in the canoe, and people still debate whether that's a bear or is it a cat. We won't get into that today, but Bingham did many pictures about life on the river. There's another one of his paintings hanging in the White House. He is a nationally known painter, but we are very lucky to have at the State Historical Society of Missouri one of his best river paintings. It's called Watching the Cargo. Yes. And what's especially interesting about that in relation to Jefferson City is it was painted in 1849 when Bingham was serving in the legislature as a representative from Saline County. So it may be that the drawings, the sketches, the landscape that we're looking at when we look at watching the cargo may be a landscape very nearby. It could also be somewhere else in mid-Missouri, but I think we're looking at the Missouri River. We see those bluffs, those tree-covered bluffs. We see the sandbar. It all looks very familiar to us in this area. Even the sky, those colors that we get in the sky, we have beautiful skies here in
Yes,
Missouri.
we do. Sunset, sunrise,
Yeah.
just the skies.
And the picture may have a political message. If you look very closely, you'll see that there's a steamboat wreck in the distance, and they are watching the cargo because they're having to move all of the goods off of the steamboat and put them on the sandbar, and then these rivermen are going to watch it overnight, make sure nothing happens to it, and get it reloaded onto another steamboat. But it's a reminder that the rivers were very dangerous. They were full of snags and shallows, and so there was an attempt to get through Congress, through the U.S. Congress, a bill to improve the rivers and harbors. And Henry Clay, the great Whig politician, was a great advocate of this bill, and it got vetoed by James K. Polk, the Democratic president at the time. And so this may be a comment on Polk's veto and the problems that were caused if you do not continue to keep our rivers running smoothly. If you want Western commerce, if you want to expand trade into the West, you've got to have a good river system, at least back in 1849.
Yes, definitely had to have a good river system for the movement of commerce, should we say.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. So it goes clear back to 1830s, the 40s, and then I guess it's Civil War days.
Yes, Bingham gets involved.
Gets involved as
he is 50 years old, so he joins the Union Army. He is anti-slavery, and he's definitely pro-Union. He thinks that secession is a terrible thing. So he joins the Union Army. They end up using him as a recruiter because he's a politician, he's charismatic, and he's 50, maybe a little bit too old to be out there in the field.
Sure.
And then he's doing that, he's doing that, he becomes a captain in Kansas City, and then he gets recruited by the governor of Missouri. Now, it's very complicated. We have one governor, Jackson, who gets kicked out of the capital, and another governor comes in. Jackson was a Confederate sympathizer, but the next governor is a pro-Union governor, and he asked Bingham to come in and be the treasurer of the state of Missouri. And so most of the Civil War, that is what Bingham is doing. He's serving in Jefferson City as the state treasurer. It's hard work. He has to leave his house in Kansas City vacant. And that will bring us to our painting, which, but let's just tell the story a little bit.
Yes.
So he leaves his home in Kansas City vacant. Meanwhile, things are getting really rough on the Missouri-Kansas border. What most people know about the Missouri Civil War is that we had bushwhackers, we had a guerrilla fighting force, not officially affiliated with the Army, but they are
pro-South.
They're pro-Southern, and they're doing things like burning down train stations, attacking the Union Army, attacking Union sympathizers. And then there, in Kansas, you have the Jayhawkers who are coming in and doing the exact same thing to the Southern sympathizers. So it's a very dangerous world full of guerrilla fighters who are not affiliated with the Army. So if you get a knock on the door late at night and somebody says, "Which side are you on?" you got to be very careful what you say, or you might end up killed. So this is the world we're living in, and the Union Army in Kansas City doesn't really know how to deal with it because they can't find these guys. They're hiding in the bush, and so what they decide to do is arrest the women, the wives, the sisters, the relatives of these bushwhackers, including William Quantrill, Bloody Bill Anderson, some of these very famous characters. And what did they do with these women? Well, they put them into a holding facility. They can't put them in a men's prison, so they find an abandoned house. And whose house do they find but George Caleb Bingham's? So they put these women in the house. They appear to have overcrowded the house, and the house collapses and kills 4 of the women, and a 5th one dies of her injuries. One of the women killed is Josephine Anderson, the sister, the 14-year-old sister of Bloody Bill Anderson.
Bloody Bill.
Now you can imagine how Bloody Bill and all these bushwhackers feel about this. They're very upset. They think that the Union might have done this on purpose. Now they're killing our women. You know, this is a very serious business, and they decide to retaliate. And the way they decide to retaliate is attack the most Union-affiliated city in Kansas, which is Lawrence. And they go into Lawrence, Kansas. They arrive at dawn. They kill all the men, the fighting-aged men that they can find. Women and children are spared, but it's a terrible terrible thing, and it makes the national news. And so the Union Army has another problem. What do? Arresting the women didn't work. We're just going to have to evacuate everybody on the Kansas-Missouri border in 3.5 Missouri counties. And that's what the painting, General Order Number 11 by George Caleb Bingham, is about. It's about that evacuation, which Benton felt was unconstitutional. He felt like the idea that the occasion of war justified this was unreasonable. These people were innocent civilians. They should not be forced out of their home, but they were. So 10 to 30,000 people were forced to leave their home. Many of them migrated to the center of the state, to this area, and Bingham shows this. He shows it happening, and he then ends the painting with a crossroads, and I feel like that's a symbol, in a way, that Missouri was at a turning point. You know, how are we going to get over the divisions and all the issues that the Civil War brought to bear? We haven't solved these problems, and Bingham doesn't have an answer, but he shows us what the problems are, and then invites us to
So
come
the
up
painting
with
in
a
Order
solution.
Number 11 is basically showing the viewers exactly what that was all about.
So it's a history painting, but it's also a
history painting.
universal painting
Yes.
because, again, we could see scenes of the way war, especially Civil War, affects the civilian population. We could see that right now in the Middle East.
Yes,
I mean,
in the Middle East.
these same situations happen, and it's always a horrible tragedy, and I think that's what Bingham was seeing. But also the idea that war, after a civil war especially, we have to decide where we're going, what we're doing next. It's a very difficult time.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Stack, both of these gentlemen's works are a big feature, as you spoke, of the new State of Missouri Historical Society Arts and Studies Center in Columbia, Missouri. Would you please tell us all you can about this new facility in a couple minutes and what it holds for the visitor?
Well, of course, the facility it's a beautiful building. So just looking at it, it's kind of a statement building, and it faces onto Peace Park, which is a beautiful park on the University of Missouri campus. So it connects with the academic community, but it also it has 2 front doors, so it also faces onto the town of Columbia. So it unites the town and the gown, if you will. So that's a nice aspect of it. When you walk in, you can visit the art gallery. We have activities, meetings, events in our auditorium, which is on the 1st floor. We also have a bookstore with a small cafe. You can enjoy coffee and maybe a donut in there. So our 1st floor is sort of our public area. And then if you want to go upstairs, that's kind of your research area. That's where especially if you're interested in doing genealogical research or researching other aspects of Missouri history, you can research old newspapers. We have probably the biggest collection of Missouri newspapers in the world that you can look at on microfilm. So there's all kinds of resources there as well. And you would have access to the manuscript collection. Of course, you'll need to let the archivists know what you're interested in, and they can pull things for you.
They're there to assist you.
Yeah.
And there's no admission.
No admission, no.
And plenty of parking.
Yes, we have, I think, 40 parking spaces, which is 40 more than we had at the old building.
Yes.
And so it's really nice to have that available to our patrons.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Stack, it's once again an honor to have you here on Mid-Missouri Art News. This time is special with Dr. Joan Stack, talking about the lives of artist Thomas Hart Benton and artist George Caleb Bingham. Well, it's been a super informative, educational event. I want to thank you so much
Oh, well, thank
for
you.
being here. Do you have any closing comments?
Oh, well, I just want to invite people to the society. I will say that we are closed on Sunday and Monday, and we open up at 8. The gallery and the research center open at 8:30. We close on weekdays at 4:30 and on weekends on Saturday at 3.
Well, thank you once again, Dr. Joan Stack, JCTV producer Gloria Enlow and crew, and thank you, our viewers, for watching. Look for more Mid-Missouri Art News right here on JCTV, and don't forget YouTube. Subscribe, view, and let us know what you think of the programs. I'm Rick Jey saying, see you next time.